Hi, everyone. This is episode 4 in our series on the topic of performance management. And today we'll dig into the distinctions between organizations that are metrics driven versus those that are more creative in nature. In the first episode, if you've been with us up to this point, you'll recognize our working definition of performance management, defined here as performance management is an active process of aligning human performance to corporate direction. Once again, performance management is an active process of aligning human performance to corporate direction. And that active portion of that definition can take on many forms. For purposes of this session, we'll look at two primary company cultures that impact how performance management gets done: creative or metrics driven cultures. These two cultural forms can determine the rhythm of performance tracking. Any company can claim to have an emphasis on accountability throughout its organizations. However, for purpose of this discussion, the notion of accountability can take shape in two primary ways. First, a creative culture implies, in short, that an organization creates responses to opportunities. Those creative responses can reflect the human flexibility and ingenuity applied to a specific customer need, such as web design, creating advertising campaigns, taking on artistic endeavors, or any number of uniquely designed responses to opportunities. In other words, these types of companies are structured to flexibly respond through their inherent expertise to client requirements. Creative cultures are less likely to be highly structured in their annual goal setting. And as a result, performance management practices are probably not as rigorous as in the metrics. In fact, you can almost expect they're not going to be as rigorous as in metrics driven cultures. I can say that with confidence. Yet, creative cultures can still ensure accountability along the way, which can be tracked and communicated during the course of a business year. Let me give you a couple of examples. In the case of projects which are performed in creative cultures, those projects can be defined with clear, SMART goals. I haven't introduced the term SMART yet, but it's an acronym. SMART simply means goals that are defined as having these attributes. They're specific, thus the S. They're measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. SMART goals. This term has been around for decades, and it just seems to hold up, whether we're talking about fast-moving young companies or established companies that have been around for quite some time. In both cases, a SMART goal simply means it's a goal that's been well defined, and these attributes can be applied. And of course, projects that by their very nature implies that they have an arc to them. If you are involved in project work, it probably means that that project has a beginning, middle, and end to it, thus the arc of the work. And this practice can shift a loosely managed organization, a creative projects driven organization, into one that potentially can welcome the creativity and risk taking while still ensuring that there's a shared, defined purpose that can be identified through SMART goals associated with the project work that's underway in those settings. Now, the alternative. Metrics cultures, by its very title, a company that's metrics driven means that they measure most everything they do. They're rigorous in tracking throughout the year the work of the organization. And the most obvious ways in which companies that fall into this definition will show up in our examples would be manufacturing companies, software design companies, analytics consulting companies, and many more. Metrics cultures are much more likely to follow the performance management flow simply because they already are in the business of setting goals, where there's corporate goals at the beginning of the year and then cascaded into the work of each organization, tracking progress, modifying as warranted, assessing where they are at different business stages. Even projects that they may have in this metrics culture can be identified and tracked, and that arc is closely monitored along the way. They can stay within their business year quarterly semi-annually and annually checking in along the way, or other key defined milestones. There's endless variations in metrics, but plenty of companies operate with this intentionality around it. And the nature of the business, the workflows, remember we talked about those earlier, allow for the ability to track the nature of the work that's being performed. Now, I should note that in both creative and metrics-driven cultures, team-based goals can be established, which is more reflective of the collaborative effort of the team, as well as the extent to which identified behaviors can be defined and tracked through the success of people demonstrating those important behaviors. Some companies identify behaviors by establishing the company values, and these values can represent the importance of these behaviors showing up no matter where someone exists within the company, at the entry level all the way up through the top executives. Values serve as a means by which critical behaviors should be demonstrated and ultimately determined as successfully represented. So, performance management can, in effect, measure how well an individual did based on what they delivered and also how they delivered it. We'll talk more about that in a future session. So, note that even organizations that may be loosely structured and working in a creative setting can still have team-based goals and values-based goals, behaviorally based goals that can help put some distinction of performance success within those types of cultures as well. So, are you operating in a creative or metrics-driven culture, or somewhere in between? From a performance management perspective, the focus is on ensuring employees know where they stand. What does success look like? Will they be fairly and consistently rewarded for that success? Do they know what's working and what's needed to be improved within the course of their work? Does leadership clearly distinguish what gets done, the tangible outcomes, and how that work is getting done, the behaviors associated with the work of the individual and the team? And we'll explore the what and the how of performance management in our next session. Thanks. That's it for today.